this is really just the outcome of a conversation on the Discord that I had with my guest here, Lady Balefire, who is a Discord member, all around awesome, awesome human being. And so the impetus of this is the House of the Dragon show has come out, and there's been a wide range of reactions to the show. Um, so among those, Lady Balefire, who is probably one of the more knowledgeable fans that I've encountered of the series, has some pretty strong opinions about the show and some good opinions. Honestly, I think she has a lot of really good insight onto into the works, the show, all of it. So, without further ado, Lady Balefire, thank you so much for coming on for this. I think it's going to be a good conversation. I am looking forward to learning a lot about this stuff. So, if you just want to introduce yourself.
Hi, Pips. Nice to be here again. And this is so funny because I've gotten so much slack for this opinion. I just first want to say that if you enjoyed the show, that's awesome. I didn't think it was like insanely terrible. I didn't think it was amazing. It didn't blow me off my feet like the first episode of Game of Thrones did. And I think you had a really valid point with asking me, like, did you like this as a show versus did you like this like as an adaptation? And that's definitely two valid ways of looking at it. So, just to give you a little idea of the source material we're going through, they're taking it from a book called Fire and Blood, which is this book, and then a lot of the stuff that's in this book is also in the World of Ice and Fire. It's like half of this book is in there, and specifically we're doing the time after King Jaehaerys dies and what's called the Dance of the Dragons, which is a Targaryen civil war. So the issue with King Jaehaerys is that he had like a million kids, so there were going to be succession issues, and Prince Aemon was the eldest, and he was the heir, and then after him was Prince Balon, and I'm gonna try to keep the family line here, so as simple as possible. But
Okay.
Aemon had a daughter named Rhaenyra, and Rhaenyra is in the show.
Yep.
And what ends up happening is Aemon dies, Balon dies, and the next in line is Viserys, who's the current king in the show. And now, right
And
before, yeah, right
just so
before,
I'm keeping track of this, so that means that the king, his sort of next generation, so his children mostly died, and
yeah,
it's left with his grandchildren who are actually fighting the secession, or
yeah. Well, it's
potentially
a
involved in the conversation.
combination. Yeah, it's a combination of you have Rhaenyra, the granddaughter, versus Viserys, the son of the king that died, Jaehaerys. And that was probably one of the first things that the show got wrong. They started opening with Jaehaerys and the Council of 100, where they're deciding who should be the heir. Now, I didn't like that because I think the show is really trying to push the female empowerment, like, this is a patriarchy, the women have no power thing. But they're like, the initial situation was that when it was a contest between like Viserys and Rhaenyra was, I think she was like 18 or something, and she was pregnant, and she was younger than she was in the show, definitely. And then you
Hmm.
had Viserys, who was actually an adult.
Hmm.
And I just at first I was just like, why are they making her like just so old? It kind of takes something away to say that, oh well, they just didn't want her as a woman. I got a good quote, and I mean, this is what it
Okay.
says in the text. Now there's not a lot of text, a lot of it's just as a history, but this says some dissented. Rhaenys herself was the first to raise objection. You would rob my son of his birthright, she told the king with a hand upon her swollen belly. Her husband, Corlys Valerian, was so wroth that he gave up his admiralty and his place on the small council and took his wife back to Driftmark. So it's not so much that, oh, you're passing me over, you're passing me my unborn son that I'm definitely going to have over, because I don't, he wasn't born at the time.
Okay. So he wasn't actually born yet.
Yeah, so
Interesting. Okay.
she's 18 and pregnant. So this is another
Yeah.
like Elaine situation. So, and Viserys was older, like, so I mean,
Okay. I mean, so
not
the
to
choice
say
was
women can't make
basically
decisions, but 18-year-old
so
year old
the
pregnant women.
yeah. So it sounds like the choice was actually not even between her in the first place. It was between her unborn son and
Yeah,
between the series.
yeah. So yeah, and I mean, it kind of mirrors something that happened in,
Mm,
I want to say the like 1300s and 1400s in Europe, where they were deciding like should primogeniture determine whether or not like women can
mhm.
ascend to a throne or inherit or something like that. And it's very interesting. It's a great history book called Game of Queens. If you want to read more about this, very interesting time period in history. But yeah, that was the first thing that kind of got me with the show. Is I'm like,
Okay.
okay, she's way too old, and yeah.
All right. So they have the Council of the Hundred. They're picking the succession. Obviously, Viserys gets picked, and then what happens after
And he becomes king, and that was another thing that kind of got me with the show is he's not the greatest king ever. He's kind of it's almost like I'd almost say a Henry VIII figure where he's very like he gets fat, he's just more into indulging himself and kind of enjoying his rule than being a very good king. And that's kind of like why Damon comes into power because Damon's his brother, and Damon initially starts the City Watch.
that? Hmm.
And unlike in the show, Damon seems to be relatively competent and he earns the adoration of the small folk enough that they call him the Prince of the City. He starts the Gold Cloaks. I mean, you do kind of see that in the show. I think they kind of condensed it a lot, which is not exactly a bad thing, but
Hmm.
that's there. And then Viserys has a daughter with Emma Aaron, who's
So
also
can I hop in here? So again, as somebody who hadn't read the source on this, um, just what I took away from the show, um, which was maybe something you would find interesting in terms of some of the complaint you have in that area. Um, I thought that they did paint Viserys as a weak king, not necessarily a bad king, but probably not a particularly good one. They had some of the setup about pirates and the treasury being fairly depleted, and like a few other things that just sort of hinted that uh, potentially the small council was really kind of running a lot of things, and that he was not a particularly well respected king. And they definitely made that fairly explicit towards the end of the episode.
yeah,
Um,
I mean, yeah, I think you're right with that. I mean, he's not like the best king ever,
yeah,
but I
and
don't
then
know.
I thought that Damon came across as competent. I thought that he, I mean, definitely like brutal, which I
Yeah,
know
he was
is a
way brutal. I was just
yeah.
like, okay.
So definitely brutal, um, potentially bordering on kind of unjust.
Yeah, they did a
The
poor
question
job.
there is, yeah, the question there is whether or not the roundup that we see in the show was justified or not. And I don't think they actually answer the question, which is why I say potentially unjust. So it is brought up by the other members of the small council that the city is overrun with crime and all sorts of stuff. So it's very possible that he went in with his gold cloaks, rounded up all of the known bad elements and criminals, and meted out sort of medieval style justice. And maybe that
Yeah,
actually would win the respect of the small folks. Certainly, the
I think
people at
it
the
would.
tournament cheered a lot for him.
Yeah, I think it
So
would.
while certainly condensed, right? I think that I, at least as a viewer, got a fair amount of what you're describing is supposed to be part of his character. Although I know that is more brutal than it sounds like you're saying he was in the books.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of known for brutality, but that's like comes more at the end. And like again, it's a writer. Like
Mhm.
I would say, if he's starting and he's already doing this kind of crazy stuff, where is he gonna go from here? Like,
Which
where do you
is a
take the
totally
character?
Yeah, which is a totally fair criticism. I mean, it's something that you and I and a lot of people on multiple channels have talked about with other shows
Yeah, with
where
Wheel of Crime, for
modern
example.
yes, for sure. Uh, but like modern writers don't seem to understand the concept of an arc.
Mhm.
They tend to like to create a character and have them be relatively stagnant in their
Yeah,
personality and their sort of character. Um, and you're right to ask that question of like where is he going to go from here? And if he doesn't change, if he's just sort of this forever, then that could signal a pretty strong kind of swing and a miss in terms of his characterization.
I
So,
know. I mean, to me, that just seems really weird because the show does a lot to make Rhaenyra the younger of the two.
mhm.
She's she ends up like marrying Damon. I don't know if spoilers here, but that's what she does, and he becomes a big ally. And I mean, it's partly a political thing. It's there was something going on with them. It's kind of creepy Targaryen stuff, but I
Mhm.
mean, so if they're painting her to be the hero, like they better make him look a little bit better, or at least make him competent. Which they did a good job of doing competent, so I can take the competency. He's evil, but he's
Yeah.
competent.
So this is another thing. I've heard a lot of people who think that they were trying to make her into a hero. Um, I think that they've done a good job of making her empathetic to the point where, like, as the audience, I can empathize with her character, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but I don't feel like I was really like thinking that she was such a great person, right? Like a lot of what I saw of her seemed to
Yeah,
be
I'm just
a
so
kind of selfish sort of child. Like she didn't want to accept the way the world works. She didn't want to accept kind of her place in the world, which we all know is like an extremely privileged position in the world, right? So like
yeah, I
the
was
complaints that
very
she had about her status was like pretty, you know, is kind of a red flag. Um, and in general, she seemed, I don't know. I think that honestly, the part that was biggest for me was her reaction to the death of her mother and new brother, unborn brother, however that kind of timeline worked.
yeah.
Um, where I think that it's unlikely that she would know sort of the details of her mother's death. Like she would just think that her mother died in childbirth and the baby died as well. But she acted with like a lot of scorn for her dad, which I don't know.
That's
In
such
my
a
in my mind, like a daughter who's just lost her mother, just lost an unborn, sibling, her father's clearly in grief, and her response to that was one where I was like, "Man, she is cold." And like kind so I don't know. I think that she may not being put up on a pedestal as a perfect person.
Yeah, and the thing with it is like she's definitely their like main character, their focus character. She is the hero, and it's like they kind of the way that they frame her character and they kind of posit who she is. It's like here you see her, and they're like telling, and it's always like women are never going to be allowed to rule. Like your battle is going to be in the birthing bed. Like
Mhm.
get used to me sitting here because you're going to be here soon. It's just a little what screenwriters would call on the nose. I mean, I don't think they
Yeah.
should. I I, I know it's the message of the show, and I know a lot of people are like, "Well, it wasn't super woke, but it wasn't like amazing either." I think that whole like childbirth had so many problems with that. Honestly, that was like I was just like, "What is going on here?"
All right. Well, let's save that for a little bit longer. Tell me
Yeah.
more about like what kind of events happened and what really we should expect to maybe see in terms of book events that would match up with like the next few episodes or this first season. Like, what would you say if you were writing the first season of the show? What events from the books would you have happen?
Well, I definitely want to set up the story and kind of like I want to take the characters and kind of give an idea of where we're going with the trajectory. Like one of my other problems was the Rainey's problem. And Rainey's is the older woman that's married to Corlys Valerian. He's the black actor
Mhm.
on the show.
Yeah.
And her problem is that in the like the thing I just read to you where she says they were so angry that they picked Viserys that Corlys Valerian like he how would you say that he like gave up his admiralty position and went back to Driftmark.
Took his
However, in
ball
the
and went
show,
home.
yeah, he just went home. He quit and said, "I'm done, fucking, I'm out," and he goes back to Driftmark,
Mhm.
and that's like they're trying to have her at the court and have that same attitude. So I'm seeing the person. This is They even say at the tournament, it's the queen who never was. Yet she's sitting there right next to Viserys with her husband and her 2 kids, and don't even get me started on the wig of the daughter. It was like loyal bad, but anyway, does it make sense to have um like, you just if you were the one that was supposed to be queen and you think you should have been queen and you're the one telling Rhaenyra that she'll never be queen because she's a woman and you're super bitter about it, so you're making comments about it in the box during the joust, like, does it make sense that you're sitting in the box with the king? Does it make sense that your husband is so chummy with him? I mean,
I
I
mean,
don't know.
so
There's
like a
some logic
decade
issues.
or so has passed between them, and like, family is family, right? So if you consider that they're all a highly dysfunctional family, and that power centers and sort of medieval stuff is what it is, I would say that my interpretation of that was that she was not as bitter about the displacement of her as the possible heir, and part of that maybe wasn't so difficult for the audience, if I consider myself the audience, um, because they didn't do as explicit of a job of trying to establish that like she had so much of a stronger claim maybe than Viserys. So the fact that like the two of them were like ones of like a large group of people, and that he got picked instead of her, but that they still all sort of worked together. It didn't pull me out of the story, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, but, like, you don't know the story of the background because I think at this time
Yeah.
in the books, Corlys and Daemon are actually in the Stepstones fighting pirates, and what actually happens with that is Daemon just goes his own way, and they start, like, just like, the 3 free cities form a triarchy like they mentioned in there, and they well first they kick the pirates out, which is what everyone was talking about with those hands bound up. They like Damon
Mhm.
captures them and puts them on stakes and lets the tide kill them, and he's brutal in that way.
Which
And
it seems like we might be seeing that
we'll
in
see
the next
that.
episode. So the next episode is apparently going to be about Damon, and we've seen some of those shots of what you're talking about.
Yeah, he's definitely the more interesting of the characters in this time period. I'd probably go back and make Damon see like he's really brutal, but he's just because
Hmm.
if he was just randomly killing indiscriminately people, are the small folk going to love him like they do, where it's actually like threatening to Viserys' power? So
Yeah.
I'd
So
probably
actually,
change that.
I actually really like the point you make there, because I think that in my mind there are probably two major things that I think didn't work, as a non sort of book reader, member of the audience on this one. And one of them is that problem that I could sense the direction that I think they were trying to go
Yeah.
with Damon, and I thought that they should have better established that the people that they were rounding up and killing, chopping off hands, or whatever, were actually guilty of what they were being accused of.
Yeah,
I think
like
that
instead of showing some guy getting his dick cut off, what if we took those 5 seconds to do like a Ned Stark? Like Game of Thrones opens with Ned Stark executing a deserter from the Night's Watch, and it's brutal. And if you read the prologue, you're like, this guy was just running away from the White Walkers. That's somewhat understandable that he would do that. But
yeah.
Ned Stark is just, and he always follows the law, and that's kind of something that happens with characters. There's different characters and different layers of like ambiguity and who is
Yeah.
morally flexible and isn't, and that's a big theme in the story. So it could have been nice to see something like that. Like I would have gotten rid of all of that and just rather have him presiding over some executions or something like that, or like proclaiming sentences. They
Hmm.
could do like mirror like Game of Thrones, at the end where they execute Ned on the steps of the Sept of Baelor. They could do something like that,
Hmm.
and it would be kind of a throwback. But
So I think that the new sheriff in town kind of thing, with like him and the gold cloaks like rushing into the town to like restore order, isn't necessarily a bad way to do it. I would have probably done two things differently. Um, I would have shown the crime and criminality in King's Landing first, right?
Yeah, that's a good
So,
point.
and if they had shown like people getting robbed and beaten and stuff like that in the city, and then had some of the people that were doing those things be people who were recognizable, like, had some distinctive characters, and then have them be the people getting their hands chopped off, beheaded, that sort of thing.
There you
That would
go.
have
That's how
that
you
would have been
film
actually a really
make.
good way to do that. And then also the other thing I would have done would, as the gold cloaks kind of rush into the village or the city, right, King's Landing, um, if they had just a few shots of like gold cloaks like knocking on doors and like somebody opening up and like pointing down like another hall, like an alley or something like that, and then them rushing off and grabbing somebody. And that would have, so just those two fairly easy and short shots
I
would have done
know,
a
it would
lot
be
to
maybe like a minute
establish.
or something.
Yeah. And you could have cut some of the chest beating whatever to make time for that.
Gratuitous violence.
Yeah.
I know it's
So
such a
that's,
hallmark of Game of Thrones, but I mean,
yeah.
honestly, do we need to see a guy getting his head bashed in? Like, does that serve the story or does that serve the scene you're trying to make?
So actually, I thought, again, me as the audience, I thought it served a purpose, because in my recollection, you see the really gratuitous violence, right? And you see Rhaenyra and what
Alicent?
is the high elephant? I'm sorry, what was it?
Alicent.
Allison, Allison Hightower. You see the two of them watching it together, right? And you see very different reactions between the two of them, where Rhaenyra is like very interested in what she's seeing, and Alicent is like disturbed by what she's seeing, right?
Yeah,
And
I think
so I thought the really graphic violence actually goes back to why I don't necessarily see Rhaenyra as being shown as a like a good person, because having somebody who's like leaning over the railing to watch that level of violence is messed up.
yeah, it is. I just like I guess
You
my
disagree
problem
with
with
me?
that I do and I don't. I just more of the problem of modern filmmaking and storytelling, they're going into like the fantasy of what people sometimes call like Game of Thrones, some other works where they call it grim dark, where everything is
Mhm.
just super dark. People are just everyone's ambiguous, no one's good. You just there's no and the good people end up getting like killed like Ned Stark or like bad things happen to them
Mhm.
like Brienne of Tarth and I just think, especially in a TV series, that I don't know if it's gonna be really, really difficult to make you like somebody. And Rhaenyra, she does a lot of like bad stuff later on. She gets a lot of people killed. Her and Allison are really bad. And that was like another thing I really didn't like about the show. Oh my goodness. The like Rhaenyra and Allison love whatever is going on with that. Like I think they were definitely, especially with that scene in the Godswood. Oh my god, not that. Oh my god, I told
Okay.
you I wasn't gonna rant.
Okay. 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 Um, we can let you can rant for a little bit, and then we'll then we'll move on to what you would do in episode 2 and on. So
Okay.
I know you have some problems with the Godswood, and I know you have
The
problems
Godswood.
with them. So
I'm
I
like,
did a little bit
okay,
of research on the fan, the I won't say the word fan, on the theories behind the Godswood scene. So I'll throw those at you after your rant, and you can tell me how much you hate
okay.
them.
I'm ranting because there is not a weirwood tree in the Godswood of the Red Keep. And then to have them showing the weirwood tree, like they actually built a tree. It's got the white
Mhm,
wood, it's got the red leaves. They're sitting under
mhm,
it in a very, very small garden. And the Godswood is supposed to be like this kind of wild area inside the castle. I was just
mhm.
like, what? That's just like, it's like pointless, like Easter egg stuff that doesn't even make sense.
So the theory that I read basically called this Chekhov's weirwood tree, and the theory is, and I think we disagree on this, or rather, you and other people I've read disagree on this, on how involved Martin is. So apparently, he's not just an EP; he's also listed as the co-creator of the show. In his comments, he's said that he has a lot more to do with this show than he did with Game of Thrones, especially the latter half of Game of Thrones, which he said he had really very little to do with. But even more than the early seasons of Game of Thrones, he says he has more control in this show than that one. So the theory is that they wouldn't have created this thing without his sort of like concurrence. And the idea is that why introduce this thing that people are going to know is not supposed to be there, because we've seen the gods would in Game of Thrones. And the theory is basically that that weirwood is not going to survive the show, that it's going to get burned or chopped down or something dramatic like that.
I think that's kind of silly because the Targaryens are in power. They built the Red Keep. Maegor
Sure.
built the like Maegor's Holdfast inside.
Yep.
The thing is, now them they did that. They worship their own gods.
Mhm.
They don't worship the old gods. The first men destroyed the old gods and cut down the weirwoods, and that's like
Mhm.
why Arya goes to that like stump on High Heart, and there's all the
Mhm.
weirwood stumps, and she has her green dreams there. They don't exist there anymore because it's been destroyed. I don't see what point like it could serve. I think honestly, the weirwood was there for fan service. They're like, let's put this in because we didn't see enough of it in maybe the first show. I don't know. I I don't know like what it would serve the story to have them cut it down.
So I will say, if we don't see a compelling, I'll say an arc. If the tree doesn't have a compelling arc in this show, I'll be 100% on board with your take on it, because I've said this
Okay,
before. Easter eggs, I think, are the lowest form of adaptive artistic work. I
me
think
too.
that they are essentially trying to jangle the keys in front of the audience to distract you with something that's recognizable in order to allow them to do other things that are not recognizable. And so it's how do you paste something on top of the holes that you're creating in the wall around it. So I will say that I think that that is a very charitable interpretation of the existence of the tree, that it might
Charitable is a
serve
good
it
idea,
might
good way of
yeah,
describing that.
it might serve a purpose. And where I think maybe we disagree, if it serves a purpose that makes sense and is logical within the show, then I would say, because of Martin's direct involvement with the show, that I would say, unless there's a book that says there was never ever a wirewood in the Red Keep, then I would say its existence in this show with Martin sign off says that there was a wirewood in the Red Keep and it was burned down under Viserys or whoever. Um, and that it's just not something that we previously knew. Um,
Yeah, I would see that. It doesn't really make sense in the world, and I mean I'm going to disagree with you on how much I think Martin is actually involved with the show. If he was on writing, like he would have writing credits. Like he's just a co-creator and an executive producer because I watched the credits to see.
yeah.
So it's like they're probably like they might be talking to him more and asking him more things. Like I
Mhm.
don't know, but we wanted to talk about the show, so
Yes, we did. All
okay,
right.
so so we're back to Rhaenyra and Allison. And I was just I don't like how they're so not so subtly hinting that Rhaenyra and Allison are lovers.
I certainly don't think they're lovers. I think that they might have a crush. I would say unrequited.
Are you
I
sure? Like
Yep.
in that Godwood scene, and like Allison is saying, like, "Well, don't you want to be in the position of queen?" And she's like she's lying in her lap, and
Mhm.
she's looking up at Allison, and she's like, "I rather like my position here."
Oh, I
And then they
I
talk
saw it.
about eating cake, and that is like a very sexual metaphor. I think by having her be Rhaenyra's lover, and if we see them, if they have sex, if they don't, I don't know. It's at least highly suggested. I would say, like, think of this. Remember how they did Loris and Loris Tyrell in Renly Baratheon? I mean, until that was like you saw them just doing the same kind of hint things, and then
I mean, so Game of Thrones was more than 10 years ago. That first early episode, and it's also still Hollywood. Uh, Male homosexuality versus female homosexuality on camera
come
are
on,
still not
everyone wants to see the girls
are
kiss.
still are still not the same beasts for these allegedly very progressive Hollywood types. Um, so I think, again, I think we would have seen them kiss minimum.
I'm just
Um,
kind of curious. It's like
so
she's waits for her when she's riding the dragon. She's lying in her lap, telling her she wants to stay in that position. She's dressing her.
here's my interpretation of that. Rhaenyra has a crush that is not returned, and Alicent Hightower is going to get with Rhaenyra's dad,
Yeah, she
and
marries
and
Viserys,
yes,
and
yes,
they're the main
and so
rivals.
the fact that the two of them are rivals is now going to even be exacerbated because she wanted to be with Alicent, and now her dad, who she doesn't like very much and doesn't have a lot of love and respect for, as we saw in the first episode, is getting with the girl that she likes. And
Yeah,
so,
I think
so
that's
I
what
don't
they're
actually
doing
think,
at the least.
yeah. And
But I
so,
just think it's so cheap. It's like, why do we have to do that? So that the end of the story, it's like, oh my god, look what the evil patriarchy is doing. Look at her dad made her seduce Viserys, and now she has to marry him. And
so that's only the message I think you take away if we see Alicent to not be into it. And Alicent, so the first shot where Otto Hightower was like, Alicent, go read to the series. She seemed very like hesitant and like it was very sort of creepy. The dad, like, whoring out his daughter, right? And
yeah,
then you see the scene with her in the series, and you're like, oh no, she is a conniving, like she is into it. She wants the power. She wants to seduce this guy to be the queen. Um, so I don't know. I mean,
I
I
don't know.
see what
It
you're
kind of
saying.
got a little bit of trepidation on her part. Like she's like, "You sure you want me to do this, Dad?" Like,
I mean, she's young, and you would expect that even if she thinks that she's a very sort of worldly empowered and like, I'm gonna get everything and take all the things that I want. She's still a young girl, so like some amount of hesitancy would actually be expected, and I think is maybe good that the actor was doing a good enough job to sort of show both facets of that in this context.
yeah,
Which I
I
will
think it
say,
was good. I'm
I
just
was impressed by the acting generally. There's
the
not
acting wasn't
universally,
awful in the show.
yeah, not
Our
universally, but generally.
Yeah, our standards have gotten so low with watching Wheel of Prime. It's like, oh my
No,
goodness.
I think that there were a few that were legitimately good.
Oh
Um,
yeah, there's definitely good. I thought Penny
and
Constantine was pretty good. The guy playing Corliss was decent. Like
mhm.
Rainier was okay.
I thought Damon
Damon
was
was
great.
awesome. I know. When
Um,
I heard they're like having Matt Smith in this, I don't like Matt Smith that much, especially from his
mhm,
playing Doctor Who. I really hate Doctor Who, but I've seen him
yeah,
in some other roles that he's done, and he does psycho brutality really well. So while he isn't the hottie that Damon is in the books, like he's gonna be able to do it. And I definitely think he was a highlight of the show.
yeah. And I actually liked Alison Hightower. I thought she did a decent job as well.
Yeah, she did pretty
Um,
good.
which
Even
is
Rainier
funny.
wasn't awful. I mean, it wasn't like amazing, but I was okay.
So I'll ask you a question. Who do you think was the worst actor that we saw?
I have no idea.
See, that's where I
There
am too.
wasn't anyone that was like really, really bad.
That's where I am too. And I
So
feel like
that's good.
honestly,
That's very good. I
like they
mean,
had
obviously
enough
the director is
characters.
good. We have
Yeah.
Miguel Sapochnik who did the Battle of Bastards, like in season 8. He's an amazing director. His
Mhm.
battle sequences were awesome. I like the cinematography he did in that, and he did a pretty good job here.
Hmm. You're sounding like you're not hating it quite as much as I thought you did.
I know everyone's like, "Oh my god, you hate this," and I'm just like, I think you had a good point where if is like, can you look at this as a piece of television? Can you look at it like a book adaptation as an adaptation? I'd say it's probably like a 5 out of 10, maybe a
Mhm.
6 being generous. As a show, it's probably about a 7 out of 10.
Can I? Okay, let me ask you the question then. On the adaptation aspect, do you think that we've seen enough stuff that does the stuff we've seen so far, is it the nail in the coffin in terms of it's a 5 out of 10 adaptation, or or are you thinking that 5 out of 10 is because of what you expect them to do with the breadcrumbs we've seen so far?
I'm
Like,
just saying that there's some
could
setup
they go
problems.
and do a lot better with it going forward?
I think there's setup problems. Like I said, it's like they're trying to tell us, okay, Corliss and Rhaenys are really chummy with Viserys, but they're not going to be, because what's ultimately going to happen is Corlys and Rhaenyra are going to, or Rhaenys is going to side with Rhaenyra in the Civil War. So, like, just having them be so close, like, maybe just
Mhm.
if they sat somewhere farther away, if they didn't make these kind of these not obtuse, like out in the open references to her being the queen that never was, just logically, like, it doesn't seem to make sense. And then the other thing that I had a problem with was like the whole, okay, we're going to have a tournament for my son that isn't born yet, but then they're also bringing up like the point that childbirth is the most dangerous thing in the world and it's like a 50-50 chance of survival, and I just think it's incredibly silly to hold, if that's the view you have of the world, and you have established that through Rhaenys and Rhaenyra and Emma and all of the things that they've talked about. I think it is really, really silly to say, okay, we're going to have a huge tournament that's so big that Damon has to come in and clean out the city to celebrate this child that may not be a son, may not even live. It's just illogical. I mean, if you read the books
Yeah,
too, there's other examples, like they'll have birth things, but they usually wait till after the birth, and the kids live for a few months.
which is pretty common sort of medieval practice as well. You
Yeah, you
typically,
do it after the
um,
fact. It's like you
yeah,
have.
you'd wait
I
until they
think
were a year old or something like that in some
I like
societies
the
even.
tournament. I think it might have been more realistic if they said, I don't know, maybe Rainey's or Rhaenyra is looking for a suitor, like it's some anniversary. It just,
Mhm,
the logic of that, like, that was just so silly to me. I'm like, why would you do that? That's like,
mhm,
it's beyond arrogance and hubris. And I just, the other thing too is you could take that and say, okay, well, Viserys is just being really arrogant and thinking that he's going to have a son. And I'm just like, well, then why did they establish with his character that he's talking to Emma and he's really worried about her and she's had all these other miscarriages and this is really dangerous for her health? He's worried, he cares about her. And then he goes to the tournament and he's
mhm.
so worried about her. He doesn't even go to attend her birth. Like, he's just sitting there, like,
So
pick a lane.
I thought that within the realm of sort of like suspension of disbelief, right? They brought up the idea that this was a bad idea, right? And
Sort
he
of.
basically, yeah, like the rest of the council was like, we should delay this until maybe after the birth. We don't even know if it's a son. And the Meisters are like, we don't know anything. And he's like, yeah, you're just Meisters. What do you know, right? So they had a conversation about it, which was, I mean, in a 1 hour episode of television, like the fact that it was brought up and that a solution was given to it, um, is enough of sort of a fig leaf, to not
It's a,
make me like to not make me angry about it, right? So like I will agree with you. I think that within the context of history and within the context of this underlying story, it shouldn't have been done that way. But I know the reason that they wanted to do it from a cinema like cinematography
yeah,
kind of
that's the
perspective.
problem. See, you have a
And
scene for
mhm.
the sake of having a scene, but the scene doesn't serve the story. Everything that you choose to do as a filmmaker or as a writer should
so
serve the story, not these
so
stories
I
serving the scene.
so I think the scene did serve the story. Um, I think that you're 100% right. I think they recognized it as a problem, and so they like put in the line and then said, it's going to happen. Everything's going to be great. And I've had a dream, and like, so I know that it's going to happen. And like,
Oh,
dreams
don't
coming
get me started
true,
on that. Oh my goodness.
dreams coming true is a thing that happens in the world, right? Like
Yes, I
prophetic
do, but
dreams, right?
whose dream is it? And would this
Yeah,
person even know? And
sure. Anyway, so the that was enough of a fig leaf, but I think that they missed the much better solution, which is what you said. If they had
yeah, why not
said,
just have another, come up with a better excuse and she just happens to be pregnant and
yeah, if they had just said that it was a tournament for the 10-year anniversary of his reign and that it was just coincidence that his wife was going to be pregnant or give birth
that makes
right
so
at the
much
time of the
more
tournament,
sense. It
they could have
doesn't.
they could have just said that and it would have been like problem solved. So while I will agree with you, it is bad writing. I will give you that. But in my mind, a if a single line of dialogue could have been changed to fix the problem, and it doesn't create any like broader problems, and it served to make an engaging scene that moved the story, which I think the tourney and the birthing, like I think that was an engaging scene that moved the story. I'm willing to give
Yeah,
some
I have a
latitude.
lot of feelings on the birth scene. I'm just like, oh,
All right, let's talk about the birth scene.
okay.
By the way, we are totally derailed. We're not talking about what happened in the books. We're just talking about the episode, which is fine.
Yeah, well, the
It's super
problem
good.
with
I
the
love
books
hearing
is
your
that it
opinions
just
on it.
doesn't there's not a lot to go on. I mean, like, aside from that quote that I gave you
Mhm.
about Rainey's and what happened there, like, there's just nothing. It said, like, well, there was some conflict between, like, Damon and Viserys, and, like, there were these problems in the stepstones. There's just nothing there. So it's like, I can't say, oh, it's not in the books. Like,
Well, then why a 5 out of 10?
because it just doesn't make sense to the later story. I mean, you have to be logical as a storyteller. I'm dealing with that right now, try as a writer, like trying to make sure everything makes sense. And like I said, it's like the trajectories they're starting up, I think are going to be problematic later down the road.
Okay, fair. I mean, I think, and anybody who didn't see it, so on Nerdporeal Lifeforms YouTube channel, myself and a couple other people do a sort of recap right after the episodes air. Um, we came out pretty favorably. I think I gave it an 8 out of 10, maybe an 8.5 from the perspective of just an episode of television because I haven't read the books
Yeah, it's
or
okay.
this specific book.
I
Um,
know a lot of people liked
but
it, so I mean, what can I say?
yeah, but all of us said the same thing where it's like, hey, they're going to need to pay off on some of the things that they're setting up. And so we all kind of said, hey, by episode 4, this either needs to be solidly going in a good direction, or we're probably going to start calling it out for doing, I think, what it sounds like you're afraid that they're doing.
Yeah, the other thing
That
that
they're
I
going to
was
start. Yeah.
thinking about this is, like, when I watched the show, I just thought, like, yeah, it was kind of a little boring. And then I just thought, well, how does it compare to the opening of Game of Thrones?
I'll still say that, like, if that show was boring, then modern television truly cannot be saved. Um,
Yeah, I wouldn't
so
like it just wasn't I don't think it's as compelling as it could be.
okay.
I think they could have made some different decisions maybe. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I had my last internship that I worked when I was in Hollywood. It's like I couldn't just say season 8 sucked. I hated it. They're like, "Okay, why what was bad about it? Why didn't it work? And what would you change?" And so I had to think about that, and I thought about, like, I think season 8 could have been saved if they would not have ditched the Aegon, the fake or Fagon plot, like we call it in the fandom.
Mhm.
I think that definitely did something. But with this, it's like I was thinking kind of the same thing. I'm just like, what could they do to save this? I think maybe giving Damon more of a character like arc, maybe looking at some of that.
Which I think is worth again pointing out. The next episode is supposed to be mostly, if not all, kind of about Damon.
Yeah,
So I think that I can really see what you're saying about how this maybe isn't the time period, or this isn't maybe the series of events that I would have filled episode 1 with. I would have maybe put more Damon stuff and the pirates and like some of these other things in that episode
yeah.
1.
I could see,
Um,
like, moving up the pirates or something, or,
yeah.
like, just introducing more of the other characters because, again, the thing that Game of Thrones did was the ensemble, and
Mhm.
we're kind of weak here, and maybe just making Otto Hightower's motivations a little bit more clear. I mean, like, look at Game of Thrones, it's like half of the fun is, like, seeing how the Tyrells are, like, scheming and how they like pulling Sansa
Yeah.
in, so are there more high towers? I know one of the
Yeah.
people in the joust was a high tower. That's probably why Allison was so freaking out. But
Yeah, and I do totally agree that that was a hallmark of Game of Thrones. I just think that that was a hallmark of, you know, 4 good seasons of Game of Thrones, 2 sort of okay seasons, and 2 bad seasons of Game of Thrones. So it's hard to say this one episode didn't deliver on the intrigue and the payoffs because
yeah,
it's one episode. It's 1 hour, not 40. Um,
Exactly. I can't
so
say. I mean, I'd watch the second episode. It would be like and see like if I'm right where I think they're gonna take the storylines. If I'm not, I could be pleasantly surprised. But
well, I look forward to having that second episode conversation with you then, because I think that you're making a lot of good points, and you're looking at it from the perspective of knowing what story is available for use, and if they, like we saw with Wheel of Time, if they're going to diverge from the story, it has to be good, right? Like I
yeah,
think
and the
most
other thing
fans
too is it
are,
has to like if they start going into the weeds, it's like they have to be logical to their own to the story that they
yes,
set up.
yeah, because
And that's why I
I think
said like that's why I went and thought of it that way and said, okay, the problems with Rainey's and Corliss, that could
mhm,
be problematic if they're trying to make these guys out as like rivals later on. And because like Rhaenyra ends up marrying Corliss's son, Laenor Valerian,
mhm.
and I think that's gonna. I mean, that to me kind of freaks me out because the way that they decided to cast the Valerians, because he's going to be a gay black man, and she's going to marry him, and she's going to cheat on him with one of the Kingsguard people that she was looking at in the show. So that's like that just is possibly something that like dangerous ground for if the progressive writers at the show have said that they are. So I'm kind of
Okay,
worried about that.
if they do what you just said, would you be more willing to say, okay, they're not pushing ulterior messages, they are trying to really do an adaptation of the show or of the books, or versus like if they shy away from that? Because I feel like you're 100% right, and I would
Well, I think
expect
like
them to
in the
shy
books she
away from
does
doing
marry Laenor first, and
that.
they have three kids, but they're definitely not his kids, which will be obvious because the guy's black. But I'm just worried because the situation that they set up with the casting and the fact that this is gay off like it presents them a very nice um it's a nice setup if they want to like throw some of the progressive stuff that they talk about in there.
So that's why, with that in mind, I would expect them to really avoid that situation of like her cheating on her gay black husband with somebody else. Like
Yeah, I don't
that'd be
know.
really
Like,
problematic.
I
So
well, I think it well, I based on what that they've said and how the directors are, I think it would be a great opportunity for say to say like, well, she did that because he's a gay black man or something like that. I don't know. Like, I hope they don't do that. They haven't made a huge showing of that kind of stuff in it. They're like not really sticking to the message, but um
at least not so far.
yeah,
So
I
it
mean,
could be a
they
bait and
went really
switch.
heavy-handed with the women stuff. Women can't be queen. Like, I'm the queen that never was. Like, your whole life is going to be childbirth. It's like, come on. It's like you
I
can't
feel
like
like
say that and then say, oh well, you can't be totally scheming and conniving like Marjorie Terrell or Cersei
Mhm.
Lannister or like anyone else.
So I feel like I perceived that more in the trailers and the statements by some of the people involved in the project. And I think looking back on the first episode, I think that if I can disconnect my expectations going into the show from what the show did, if I can disconnect what the cast and audience and producers have said and what was in the trailer beforehand, if I take those things out and I just look at the show that they gave us, I don't actually see that too strongly within the show. In fact, I actually saw a fairly favorable look at motherhood, which is generally like antithetical to the sort of progressive kind of female empowerment message, where Emma seemed like she actually was happy with her lot in this and viewed it as an actual like a noble sort of undertaking to be a mother, um, which
So while we're talking about Emma, and I know we've been doing this for
yep.
a while, and I'm gonna have to go and have dinner soon, but I almost feel like the Emma and what happened in the childbirth scene was like they were almost just fridging the woman to cause man pain for Viserys and make us like him more. I mean,
all these,
I'll be perfectly honest and say that she dies in the story in childbirth and the baby
yeah.
dies with her. And I just cannot deal with how they did that. It was so insanely cruel. I
So
can't
this
imagine
is the
being in
second
that.
thing. So I said there were two things that I think that they really bungled, and this is the second one. So I'm totally in agreement with you on this.
I can't imagine that. I mean, if I was her and I had a kid and I was like, "It's your life or the kid's life," I mean, save my fucking kid, dude. That's not even a question. But like, they don't
Mhm,
even tell her, and she's already established that she knows the risk, but she's doing it anyways because she wants to have a kid. And then they just like they do it so brutally. It's like, why
mhm.
would do that? And then it's all to make us feel sorry for Viserys because that was the like question that was given to him, and it was his decision that he made this.
So okay, so obviously, my background and why we have this channel is Wheel of Time, right? And
Yeah.
one of the things that we've said about Wheel of Time is that at a certain point, it became obvious that it is not incompetence; it is
Malice.
intentional, right? It's belligerence, um, and this is where, at the mo at for right now, I think that all the problems that I have with this first episode, I can look at as bad writing mistakes, where I think I see what they were trying to do, and the thing that they did accomplished it. If you don't necessarily think too hard about some of the details, I think so the average audience, I think, actually got the message that they wanted you to get. If
Yeah.
you think about it too hard, you're like, okay, you kind of missed some of the elements here, but I see where you were going, right?
Yeah.
Um, and this is an example of that because, like you said, if the mother had been presented the option to, like, hey, the
Why
child
would
is
you just
breech,
why
it's
would you
Middle
not
Ages,
tell
right?
her?
Like, yeah,
Why was she conscious?
yes.
Just so
So
you could have your cool shot of them eviscerating her while
yeah,
it's
that was rough.
rough cuts with the guy getting his head bashed in, like, that's just cheap storytelling, like, that's just lazy. I'm sorry, I
Mhm.
hated it, and I didn't necessarily feel that, like, everyone's like, "Oh my god, the actors," and I cared so much about them. I was just like, "That's a cheap ass way to do that," and I didn't appreciate it. To me, I wasn't that moved by it. I was just like I was really just speechless. I couldn't say anything. I thought that was handled really horribly. I don't think if he loved her that much, he would have never said anything. I don't think they would have tortured her like that. And
Yeah.
it was gross.
So
I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. That's how it made me feel.
no, I agree with you. I think it was mishandled. I think the cut back and forth with the two different battles, the men's battle and the women's battle, I think was a good idea. I think that the
They didn't have to
execution,
be so heavy handed with it.
yeah, I think the execution faltered because of what you said. They didn't tell her, and they did it while she was conscious. And so again, kind of going back to, like, the gold cloaks, right? I would pitch, I think, a better way it could have been done. So if they had said, if they had given her the opportunity and said, "Look, the Meisters are saying that this pregnancy is not going to happen. You're likely going to die in childbirth, and the baby's going to die with you. But they have an experimental procedure that can save the baby, but it will mean that you're going to die, right?"
Mhm.
I think it would have been a very empowering moment for her as a wife and mother to make that voluntary self-sacrifice to say, like you did, save my child, right? And then you could have seen Viserys go through the struggle that they tried to have him do, right?
Yeah,
And him
but by
having to
doing it
deal.
this way, they
Mhm.
said, well, oh, it's the man that made this decision, and that's horrible. Oh my God, the patriarchy. He would
Yep.
throw away his wife's life just to have this heir.
Which, if they lean into that narratively going forward, then I will say that it was intentional. I think talking through it with you, I think you've convinced me on some of the elements of it, and I think that, um, thinking back on some of it, I think probably would adjust my rating down a little bit. Um, I think I'm more favorable on it than you are, um,
That's fine. I'm totally
but
cool
I
with that.
do,
I have
but I
high standards.
But I do think so. Going back to kind of what I think they could have done in that scene. So if she had sacrificed herself, and he had had the grief of having to deal with his powerlessness as his wife
Yeah,
is
that would have been
literally
so much
is
better. We would have
is
cared about him so much
yeah.
more.
And then after that goes through, so she says, knock me unconscious, which would have been necessary, and that the fact they didn't do that is disturbing. But anyway, if
How
she
much
had
here's
volunteered.
the thing, here's one thing, Bibbs, like, how much more emotional impact if you had, like, their final conversation and she's saying, "I love you, Viserys. Please take care of our child, and, like,
Mhm,
I'm sorry that this happened." To me, that would have been, like, so much more moving than, "Okay, like,
yes,
hold her down, we're cutting her open."
yes, and what it would have set up is, so she sacrifices herself. The Meisters bring the baby to the king. The king is holding the baby, and you see the baby stop crying, and he asks, so he's like holding the baby at his now dead wife's side, basically like reliving the promise that he just made, like, I'm going to take care of this baby
And the
because of
baby
this
just
sacrifice.
dies.
And the baby dies, like in that scene. That would have been like crushing.
I
Right?
know, it's
You would have
just
felt so much for all of the characters. And so that's why, like, when I think of this scene, it is such a missed opportunity, that the way that you phrased it about the other way of interpreting it, that's why I'm like, okay, I can see potentially the message creeping in place of the story, because
yeah,
I
we're
mean,
on quicksand right now.
just the two of us sitting here came up with a way better way to build that story.
I know, and
Um,
then, of course, it goes back into the trope that everyone hates, that all these progressive people say they hate so much, fridging the women for man pain, and then you see it in Wheel of Prime with, like, Perrin and his wife, you
Progressives
see
love
it
fridging
here.
women.
I know, it's just,
you
oh
can't
my goodness.
you can't have a
But
progressive showrunner not fridge a woman in episode one. Apparently, I mean, it just
or make some really horrible, like, sexist or homophobic or racist, like, inadvertently.
yeah. Gosh, I just can't get over, though. Imagine, so like the two scenes going back and forth, and you see Damon cheering, like thinking that he's won, Viserys holding the baby, right? And then Damon hit from behind, loses, and Viserys holding the baby as it dies. And you're just like, just victory, victory is achieved, and then just defeat just clawing its way back simultaneously through both of them.
Yes!
It
It's
just
so
would have
much
been
better.
okay, you know what,
So
Lady Balefire, you and I need to write scripts, and
me too.
just tell Hollywood to suck it. And
We'll just do it ourselves, we can do it better. Yeah,
um,
so are we watching this weekend, and then we'll talk about it next week?
yeah, I think for sure. I really am, especially, and honestly, I'll say the same things I've said about Rings of Power, that like I want it to be good. I
I
really
know, I
want to
want it
watch
not to
to
suck,
like it,
but
and so far I do like it.
that's good.
But
It's the best of a bad lot.
I do have some concerns. I know you have some strong concerns, and I think that you've convinced me that there are a few more cracks in the story than I initially saw. So I'm definitely looking forward to having that next conversation.
Yeah,
Um,
awesome.
and on top of that, I mean, we'll probably are you going to make your own channel here? Have we finally
I
convinced you
hope so.
that you
Yeah,
have to
I'm
do your
hoping
own?
to do a channel where
Because
we can talk about literature and probably do a more analysis. I know a lot of people talk about Game
Mhm,
of Thrones and they talk about the characters. I'm interested in talking about the literature, the writing of this, some other things. I have some other friends that would like to talk about like Wheel of Time in that regard, and maybe talk about Wheel of Time
mhm.
and philosophy. So
Yeah,
I think I might actually do it this time. So I'll let you guys
awesome.
know, and always find us at the White Cloak Discord. So that's the
Yeah,
place to be.
yeah. I think you have a great voice on a lot of these issues. I think that you clearly have a passion, and you have some background and some knowledge, and I suppose experience that lends a different insight into these things. So I would be super excited to see you kind of start a channel, start these conversations, and who knows, if you have your channel started by the time I get this edited and posted, link will be in the description for Lady Balefire's own channel. And maybe in the future, we'll be doing these chats on your channel and
Yeah,
bringing
that would be
the
fun.
disreputable White Cloak mob
But
over
I'm
to
always
Lady
gonna be
Balefire's
a
own
white
channel.
cloak, guys. You're the best.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for making time for this. I
Thank
hope
you,
that
Pips.
you thought it was a good conversation. And yeah, we'll see what this Sunday brings in terms of the show. So thanks again for coming out. Awesome to always to have you on as a guest,
Thank
and
you very much, Pips.
hopefully next week we'll either be announcing your shortly to be released new channel, or we'll be doing it on your channel. Everybody, we'll see you next time on White Cloak's YouTube. Walk in the light.